Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and I am joined by my good friend, Julian Stardust. Julian, how are you doing? Okay?
Yes, I'm not quite sure of my origins, and I've always felt like an alien. But how are you doing?
I'm not too bad. The way to check is, can you basically pull basically sort of real plastic contact lenses off your eyes? Are they real? That's what you want to be asking yourself. Check yourself in the mirror.
I can do that, but I don't do it because it would kill you in shock.
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to get to that scene. Right, before we should re-explain what we're talking about today. Today we're going to be talking about a film that neither of us had seen until we sort of did this. We're doing this for this review, so this is a newie for both of us. It's the David Bowie starring The Man Who Fell to Earth from 1976, directed by Nicholas Roeg, starring David Bowie, Rip Torn, Candy Clark, Bernie Casey, Buck Henry, a bunch of other people. And I was going to try and give a bit of a plot, but basically...
Good luck.
Yeah, it's like 3 films in one. It may well be an actual biography of how Bowie became Bowie, maybe. It's also the story of how an alien literally falls to Earth, and then using alien technology becomes an industrialist who uses the money to try and return home with water. But then also through, I don't know, being poisoned by Western culture and television and alcohol, starts to sort of be corrupted by it. Eventually, sort of being abducted by not the government but his own company to be tested on. It's a little unclear. We'll get to it. But first and foremost, before we get into the sort of plot, that's the gist of it. But Julian, what were your thoughts then watching this? Initial thoughts?
Yeah, I think one initial thought is that it is one of those movies that just keeps going on and then becomes a very different movie. And I quite like that. It's not, those sort of acts are not as clearly demarcated as, like, say, The Crying Game, which is like clearly each act is just a totally different movie. But it starts a little rough with like that the crash is just kind of like unseen and a little shaky, and and you're just like, okay, I don't know what to expect here. But I'd say, like, by about halfway through, I was like, this is probably a clear contender for my top 10 sci-fi films of all time.
Yeah.
I'm not joking. I mean, like, I love this movie that much.
I have to admit, right? When it starts, and again, I knew little. I tried to sort of avoid learning about it. So I thought I want to go in this as sort of a like an open experience. And that opening section where he goes into the pawn shop and sort of sells the ring to get some money as a bit of a starter. And I'm like, I don't. And then it sort of quickly transitions to him in a suit and a hat, and he's got all this sort of like patents. And I was like, it starts really jarring.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, I don't think this is going to work for me. I was really worried. But quickly you sort of weirdly fall into the groove of this film. Like it's sort of like, it's not going to stop for you. Like, this film doesn't care if you keep up or not. Like, but you sort of fall into the groove. You either fall into the groove or you don't. I think that is the way it'll go. And again, like, by about halfway through, I was like, I'm really enjoying this. It's fascinating. It's weird. It's slightly incoherent. But it's full of really good ideas. And like I say, David Bowie's just magnetic in it. Like, he's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I don't know how good of a performance it is.
No.
I mean, there's a whole debate over, like, he says that he was stoned through the whole production, and other cast members are like, no, he was not. He was on his shit. But I mean, he just basically plays David Bowie, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he plays like a weird, aloof kind of guy, very confident, that Bowie confidence, and yet strange. So it works perfectly. I mean, it's perfect casting, and we never really got a Ziggy Stardust movie, so this is like as close as we get, although it lacks the Bowie music. But no, I mean, I felt like what you're describing as incoherence, I felt like there are things that are just like not explained, and there are scenes of kind of like connective tissue that aren't shown. And so, like, even early on, you sort of see him, and he's got like, a bunch of different rings all on a string, which are like, I guess he's brought with him to pawn. And he's just sort of like slumming it. And you're thinking like, okay, is this coming out of like Easy Rider or something? Like, is this like the I'm the Outsider Drifter movie? And then it turns into, oh, okay, he's made all these, he negotiates these patents, and builds a company, and brings the lawyer in, and all of that's fascinating. But I mean, there is this sort of like connective tissue that's just scenes that are missing. And I kind of feel like, okay, so you're not going to show us certain things, but it's enough, we can pick up on what's happened, but you're more interested in that shot of him by the river, or the shot of him walking in that suit, or a look and feel. And I really dig that.
Yeah, this film has definitely got a mood, over certain things. And I assume you watched obviously the 40th anniversary edition is pretty much the only one you can get now, which is the full version, 2 hours, just over 2 hours, 2 hours 18, I think, 2016, something like that.
Yeah.
When this was released, it was 20 minutes shorter, and they moved some of the scenes around. So
I can't imagine how incoherent that would have been.
Oh, yeah, so apparently it was an absolute flop when it came out, because people were like, this film makes no sense. And when I'm going, well, I've watched 2 hours, 20 minutes of this thing, and there's still parts of me that I'm not sure about, but at least it sort of works. So, yeah, I can imagine why this sort of fell by the wayside a little bit. But yeah, no, there's stuff in this film that is consistently good. Like you say, but Bowie's performance isn't, he's not acting. It's a performance, but it's not acted. It doesn't require of him to be overly dramatic. Like, this isn't where he's going to have. He has scenes of dramatic dialogue, or conversing with other characters, but because of his sort of, like you say, that alien aloofness, like, he can play it, or does play it a certain way, and it works.
Yeah.
Because he's that unusual character, like, especially like as he gets more and more sort of like, influenced by alcohol and all this other stuff, and the weirdness that comes later. Like, you thought, yeah, he can just be odd and a bit, abstract, and it seems to all work. It sort of hangs together as a performance that I'm where I think if it was a proper actor, someone who definitely took it on as a role, would probably be applying too much acting to it, and you wouldn't get that, alienness.
Yeah, and so much of why that works is sort of like the long pause with a close-up on Bowie's face as he looks sort of inscrutable, expressionless, and then says something in a sort of like monotone voice that should be a sort of like emotional statement, or he's failed to read the emotional situation, in a sort of like, autistic sort of way, where, it's like, yeah, you're not responding to the emotional statement that's been said. You're literally responding to it in a way that's not incorrect, but does seem sort of a little off.
Yeah, it's almost like Spock taken to the ultimate level, isn't it? That's sort of like, completely devoid of emotion, especially towards the start of the film. Like he's completely devoid of emotion when he takes those patents and stuff to Farnsworth, and he's having that conversation, and he's like, and he's saying, "Well, no, I'm going to pay you this much money, and I'm going to take for these much hours, and then in fact, I'm going to make you." CEO of the company and this other stuff. Like it's all straight fact. Like he's not trying to. Farnsworth's a bit like, are you conning me? Like but you can see like there is no con. It's just like no, I'm just telling you what's going to happen. And it's
what I really love about that is like like I said, I was sort of like a little concerned at the beginning that it was going to be sort of like a sort of 60s counterculture, sort of like do drugs, drop out kind of thing, which is sort of like Stranger in Strange Land, right? But there's this weird way. I mean, we're living in this sort of like post-capitalistic hellscape, and we have here's this alien, and he like clearly he cares about his family back on his alien planet. You see them. It's quite amazing to see. And he clearly he's not a bad guy, but he becomes a sort of CEO type, and he embraces capitalism, but it's a means to an end. And you don't know really until halfway through what his intention is, that the whole point of all of this is to build a rocket and get water back to his dying planet. That's not clear at all through most of the movie. No. It's like, I'm an alien. I guess the way you succeed here is through business. But it's interesting to me that he's not like either a messiah, who's super enlightened, or a evil person. That whole capitalism thing is just a means to an end for him, and he does it well.
Yeah, well, it's a means to an end to him. It's the people around him that sort of like because there's a great one of the is that for slightly chunky bit at the beginning, that's choppy bit at the beginning, but there's a great line when he showed him the patents to Farnsworth, and he says about taking them to the thing, and he says, well, when you're rich, when you've got all the money that I'm going to give you, you can buy, you can get rid of all this sound equipment that you've got, and you can buy some of mine. And he's like, well, what, even though it worked for you? And he's like, well, that cost,
Yeah.
And it's again, like, not said with emotion, it's just said. But like you say, this, so for him, he's like, well, no, I need to make money to he knows his end. But I like the fact that other people around him instantly are like, well, what's the con? What's the game here? In the business side of things. And Farnsworth obviously tries to run it as a business and questions him and stuff down the line when he says, I want to do this, I want to do that. And so you see the swings and roundabouts of capitalism going on around him, but he keeps himself, suitably distant from it for the most part.
And he doesn't relish it. He doesn't relish like, ruining the small guy and putting, Radio Shack out of business or something, So it's not played as evil. But I think that inscrutability plays into that too, where you spend a lot of time wondering what is his motivation or what is he feeling, and that makes it a more interesting movie, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you are for a large portion of the film in the same position as some of the people he works with, when they're like, yeah, no, he's brilliant, but I don't know I don't know what he is. I don't know what his objective is or who he is. Really, they're all a bit in the dark. They just seem to see that they can make something from it. And the same with like the character played by Rip Torn, like the scientist guy. Like he's another interesting one. In the same way that like you see him leaving his job, and I like that speech he gives to his boss at whatever school and that's out. It's like we're just teaching them to think like middle-aged people because that's what we know. We're just teaching them stuff that's 10 years, 15 years old. Let's try and be. And then so he does jump on board, and even that, then he's like, no, I am going to be pushing the boundaries, and that will mean doing some inscrutable things. So again, that he's the reason that he gets captured later on. In fact, he's one of the last characters you see. It's not really, so although it's the man who fell to earth, it's a lot of the characters around him that seem to be driving you know, the behaviors that you're looking at and going, yeah, that's how a human would act. You know, we aren't great. You know, Mary Lou, another, you know, the other character, the sort of the third sort of important character to him is this waitress that he meets. This sounds horrible to say just this waitress, but she is just a waitress that he meets, and they have this relationship, and she's like, well, through a series of events, becomes absolutely psychologically broken by the end of the film.
Yeah.
So it is interesting that he's at the center of it, but like he never really changes, but it's the people around and the circumstances do change.
He changes, you know, I mean, you know, he descends into alcoholism and, you know, depression and I mean, I think the ending is quite good in that respect. But I think, like, you know, Mary Lou sort of represents, you know, and maybe it's sexist that it's, you know, the female character who does this, but she sort of represents the everyman, right? She's just, you know, sort of like salt of the earth, you know, normal American, you know, works hard, takes him to church, you know, and, you know, which is hilarious, seeing Bowie being awkward in church and being like, hey, at least I can sing, you know, like there's a kind of camaraderie here. And, you know, it's interesting. And, you know, she doesn't want all that much from life. I mean, she represents that sort of everyman as opposed to the, you know, the lawyer and the professor. But it's interesting that, you know, like Bowie doesn't ever seem to agonize about the fact that, like, he is cheating on his wife on this other planet. It's not clear if there is even that concept of monogamy on his planet, although it does seem to be like a family unit.
It does. That's an interesting thing as well, though, because well, maybe it's two things that just sort of struck me there that sort of you mentioned is basically the trifecta of people that he is surrounded with and you follow through this film is corporate capitalism, academic interests, and the as you said, the everyman, the sort of the regular Joe. And again, I think one of the interesting things about this film is, as you said, it's literally about an alien. You see him in his alien form, and so, you know, it's not a case of like, is he crazy? Like, is this a thing? Like, no, he is definitely an alien. But then it's not like Man in Black or E.T. or, you know, Close Encounter of the Third Kind. This is a sort of like, so you get to see, you know, although this extraordinary character is at the center of all this, who is an alien, it's almost like, here's how things would react. Capitalism goes, how can we exploit this? How can we make money from this? Academia shows a curiosity and ends up trying to destroy it through its, or at least I don't think it's a criticism of this guy, sort of like progress in academia, where they're like, you've invited in, and then you almost sort of try to destroy the thing you are trying to respect and learn about, and then
that concept of like, we kill to dissect.
Yes, exactly. Later on, and then the regular Joe struggles with this concept of anything outside of their bubble, and so I like the fact that these three characters, you know, are you know, representative of that, and then trying to, without showing massive epoch-changing things going on in society. Like I say, it's a relatively small story in some respects.
Yeah, and I like that it is ambiguous, but, you know, like, I don't think the story is really that ambiguous. I don't think any of the narrative is ambiguous. I don't think, you know, but there are these questions of like, well, is he cheating on his wife? Well, that's left for you to figure out.
No, I'd say it's left for you to determine based on your morality, because again, it could be an alien morality. Because the other point I was going to make is he does obviously have sex with Mary Lou using, I don't know, God knows how it works, but human organs, like, you know, human sex organs. You do see Bowie Wang flying around in this film on several occasions, but when he's presented as an alien, when he is
Bowie Wang, is that one word or two?
That's two. That's when you see him in his alien form, he's like Action Man. You know, he's sort of genitally free, and you see in one of the, I love some of the stuff where you get these flashes of his family or his relationship with his wife. You see them covered in this goo, and this, you're like, what the fuck is that? What is going on? As he's sort of lying on this bed, and Mary Lou's trying to sort of, obviously trying to process this stuff, and then she sort of gives in, takes her clothes off, and she's about to lie with him, and she pulls her hand away, and it's all gooey and sticky, and you realise that everything he's been doing up until this point has been like, okay, I'll adapt and acclimatize, and I'll do your weird, human interactions and human sexual acts, and he's about to try and share with her. To me, that was the moment he truly cheated on his wife, because he's like, oh no, I'm going to share with you how I, share physicality in our species, and it revolts her, and she runs away, and it breaks her. And to me, so at that point, I don't feel he does cheat on his wife in that sense until that moment, really, because that's when he's like truly trying to share himself and his physicality with her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not to jump ahead, but he never gets back home. Which I don't know. I mean, I think that the those moments and how we're allowed to feel what we feel about them. The movie doesn't tell us what we should feel about him. It doesn't tell us what we should feel about that relationship. Like, obviously, it starts very superficially. I mean, she sort of doesn't have a lot going for him. Takes him, he's got this problem where if he moves quickly, he gets, that's another thing, is he's not a powerful alien. He has no superpowers. In fact, if anything, he is deficient. He can't ride an elevator without getting, passing out. But he always demands the car drive slower. There's this whole sort of like refrain through the whole movie. He's vulnerable to X-rays. On the other hand, he can see them, but really his superpower is knowing advanced technology. But it doesn't tell us what is that morality like on his home planet. We're left to assume it's more or less like ours, but it could be different in key ways. People could be less emotional there, for example. And then, we're also left to feel or think what we think about other key moments. Like, there's that wonderful moment where I think he's talking with Bryce, the professor, and he says, like, oh, you've always had visitors. And he's like, oh, they're clear to me. And he seems to feel like, without knowing it, there's a lot of similarities to Martian comics. But, it's this idea of like, yeah, if you were an outsider, you'd say, oh, it's crystal clear. Some of these people have been similar outsiders, right? I don't know how you guys don't pick up on that.
Yeah.
And I guess I buy it, but we're left to sort of like make up our own mind about how often these planets are in fact visited by a lone person. It's just never an invasion. It's never any of those cliches of a superpowered alien or an invasion fleet. This is the way it happens.
Yeah, and I love the fact he calls them visitors, like you say. Well, yeah, because it sounds like they're probably more successful than he, because obviously he doesn't get home, so they're sort of more like, oh no, they visit and they leave, or whatever. But it's I do like some of the conversations he has with Rip Torn of Bryce are fascinating, because they are based on that idea of science. Because again, Bryce figures it out. He basically, like, he doesn't see him. He's like, he's like, well, you're one of them, aren't you? You aren't. And there's a wink and a nod there. Because when he takes him to the spaceship, and he said, well, I've been watching you, I've learned about you, and sort of there's a almost like a mutual respect there, and he wants to share it with him, and I think he respects that academic side. And so I find their relationship really interesting, because it's that more so than he tolerates the capitalist side, the corporate side. He's like, look, I need you for what I need to achieve, but I don't think, other than that first scene, I don't think he ever really shares a scene with Farnsworth again in the same. They talk over the phone beyond that, after that, so they never
They're
They
not
never-
close.
No,
right?
they're
There's
not
no
close.
friendship. Yeah.
No, but with Bryce, there seems he's almost like, yeah, you potentially could be someone I can talk to.
Mhm.
Like, you are willing to push the boundaries. You're willing to think similar. I can feed you information. I feel like I can trust you. And they have a really good. I love the conversation in the spaceship that he's built when he says about this. Do you trust me? He says,
Mhm.
it's about as much as you could expect. He said, okay, well, I'll take that. That's fine.
Well, and I think he says like I'm trying to,
Yes.
and Bowie says like I'll take that, and it seems like Bowie wants to earn further trust,
Yeah.
right? Like there's a transactional nature to that relationship, but there is also, in this incredibly cold way,
Yeah.
reaching out for friendship, right?
Yeah.
That, you're right, is different than his relationship with anyone, except maybe Mary Lou.
Yeah, Mary Lou becomes almost like an odd. I don't know, because there's clearly like a physical thing there, but it doesn't seem like a friendship, because he's quite happy to sort of, when he sets up his televisions and he's doing all those other bits and pieces, like he's quite happy to sort of disengage from her when he gets bored of her or frustrated with her or whatever. There's no love there.
Mhm.
in the sense we would expect or understand. It becomes her obsession rather than his. Like, she's the one that sort of later on, she calls him Tommy all the time. Obviously, Thomas Summit Newton.
Thomas Jerome Newton.
That's it, Thomas. Yeah, so she obviously knows it was Tommy. And later on, when they sort of when she's seen it all, and they sort of try to pay her off, and she's like, "I want to see Tommy. I want to see Tommy." Like, it's. He's like, no, she's bad news now. So like, push her aside. Like, he's. But even like, it's not until later in the film that when they're reintroduced that you sort of feel, oh, there was something there, or at least he feels that in her not being there, he missed her.
Well, I mean, it strikes me as, I mean, I'm not married, but I mean, it strikes me as most relationships, like they're, we don't look, their relationship starts in the worst way possible, which is random pairing, right? She takes him back to his hotel room. I mean, which is weird. Like, I mean, you have a guest passed out in an elevator and you're like, I'm going to drag him into his hotel room rather than like call management or something. But
one of the best things, she carries him, like she literally carries David Bowie, like, and it's a great scene of her carrying him down the corridor. Really well done.
Yeah, and it's another one of these like weird idiosyncratic little scenes. But I mean, I do feel, for as idiosyncratic and ambiguous as this movie has as its vibe, I also feel like things play out pretty much as you'd expect, or they should, given what's really going on, which you don't know, you're never told a précis of at the beginning or something. And so you think about that relationship and you think this is, it's like when I would get into relationships in high school. I didn't choose those partners. Yes. I mean, they were the people who I knew who were available and expressed interest. We didn't have anything in common. We were just, liked, a couple things, that, some musical similarity or something. And in fact, we were from totally different worlds. And there was no way that was going to, I mean, here, literally different worlds. And there was no way that was going to work out. But, I didn't know that at the time, and so I think like in that scene, it's painful for me, but it also strikes me as, yes, that's exactly how it would play out. There was, of course, there's love there. You spent time with somebody, you're intimate with them. Obviously, he shows his true form to her. There is love, there's feeling, there's reaching out for, I want this to be something more. I want this to be more intimate. I want this to be closer. And yet you can see from the outside, like, the odds of this working are very small. It's not like you chose each other due to, 98 metrics of compatibility or something.
No. And you're right, I suppose, because he makes the choice to present his true self to her. And that it seems like a moment of vulnerability where he's like, no, I'm giving of myself to you. And when it goes terribly wrong, it's quite heartbreaking, really, because, other films could have played that up and been like, oh, this is the real you, and you're still you, and I love you. But like, she screams and wets herself. Like, she is terrified when he opens that door, and I thought that was a fascinating response to have this relationship where you're like, no, I've known you for. So this is the other point as well, is the time scale of this film.
Yes. Good point.
Is that it's never entirely clear when time's passing. Like, they do show you, because people age, and you start towards the end of the film, you start to see grey hair introduced and different bits and pieces. But that relationship, you sort of determine actually is years. Mary Lou and Tommy are together. It's not weeks or days. It's clearly a couple of years before he presents himself. Yeah,
right. Because that whole business empire. I mean, that's years in building. Even if you're introducing these products, they're everywhere. You start seeing like those products in the background of just
people are using it. Yeah, you see when you before you meet the professor, when you put Bryce, when he's with some of the girls and stuff, they're using the cameras and all this other stuff. So the technology is being introduced. So yeah, it must be years. And so they've been together for years, and then he presents this self. Removes the contact lenses, removes his ears and his hair, and all this other stuff. And for her to be like, it's kind of heartbreaking, because she's sort of like, she really doesn't know how to process it. Like, she's not set up to. She's not. She hasn't got the faculties to process this information, to sort of go, this person I've been living with for however many years actually is an alien being. And
well, you said it's heartbreaking. Heartbreaking for whom?
I feel for her. I really do. I really feel for her, because that moment, because she tries again, and it's the whole scene, beginning to end. He makes the decision, and I understand why. Like, it's a choice he makes, and when the door opens, and this obviously comes later in the film, but like, so he opens the door, and her reaction is terror. And she stands there, and you see her wet herself. And he walks past and lies on the bed. And he, again, like, this is that weird thing of like, he doesn't comfort her. He doesn't say like, there's no sort of like compassion to say, well, this is who I am, and I'm still me, or whatever. He just leaves her and lies on the bed. And eventually she sort of processes it enough to sort of approach him on the bed. She takes her clothes off and she lays with him, and then he, I don't know, goos on her, for want of a better phrase. And that's when she's like, nope, can't do this. And she screams and runs off, and she curls up into a ball in the kitchen.
Yeah. And
I'm like, and again, she's left to that. And that's pretty much the last you see of her, and for at least 15 minutes. And for me, the heartbreaking part of that is like, is this tsunami of information that just hits her, and she's, because and not to downgrade this character, but like, she's clearly an alcoholic. She's not, and she says repeatedly, like, she wants to marry Tommy, she wants to just settle down, she's not looking for a big life, she just wants to live in this nice house they've got in the desert next to this thing where they're building the rocket and all this other stuff. Like, she's happy with this small life. So to be hit with this thing and then left to process it on her own, to me, I was like, fucking hell, like, that's heartbreaking. Like, no wonder she's broken later in the film. Like, it's that, to me, that was really hard to watch that in some ways, because like, it's a PTSD moment. Like, that will, she knows something that she can't share with the world because no one will believe her. She's trapped in it with this information, and the only person she can then share her life with is Tommy.
Yeah,
that's the problem of it. It both sets her free and traps her at the same time. Like, he sets her free, but then she's like, well, I can't do anything with anybody else, because
that's fascinating. I mean, I was thinking that it's heartbreaking for both of them, because he's revealing his true self, right?
She rejects him,
and she is horrified by, I mean, but then he doesn't have the emotional reaction you would expect. But again, you're left to think, is he just sort of, he might have an emotional reaction, but maybe he's just being sort of like, okay, well, there's nothing I can do except lay down and just let her process this information and let her get acclimatized. But I mean, you're right about everything, and I think that reaction strikes me. It strikes me as the correct reaction someone would have, right? And so, what amazes me is how how inevitable. So I mean, for a plot that seems to veer left and right when first going through it into just weird territory, it also has this sense of inevitability. Like, yes, that is what would happen. Nobody is going to be like, oh, really, you're ET? No problem, honey. Like,
that's why, like, this is not a Spielberg film. This does not have that Hollywood compassion and that Hollywood understanding.
Sentimentality.
That would come with other films. I mean, like you said, like E.T. is a good example, or even Close Encounters. That thing of like, we're introducing, and I'm just going to jump aboard and piss off into the galaxy with them. Like, no, this is mind shattering. Some of this information, and you're right. Her reaction, it drives her further into alcoholism, and so the only other person she eventually can share her life with is Bryce, because he knows too. And so that sort of whole thing is why I sort of find the whole that relationship really interesting.
Because at the end she she's with Bryce after years have passed.
So but you're right about it being inevitable, and it feels authentic. It feels sort of like as if this is the reaction to have. But it's also kind of one of the things I found most, because it's 1976. This film was released, and one of the things I found the thing that I found bizarre, and it may be I don't understand or don't know enough about the history of them at the time. Farnsworth. So you have these three characters. Bryce is a promiscuous professor who basically acknowledges he basically sleeps with all these 18-year-olds.
His students.
Professor. Yeah, with his students. Like,
right. I mean, that was still in the 70s. That was considered a perk of the job, believe it or not.
And so I didn't know how to process that in many ways, because I thought the same thing. I was like, no one else seems to care or give a shit about that. It's sort of like, well, that's what he does. But I'm like, that seems like a fireable offence now. But was it at the time?
Yeah.
And so that sort of, I was like, I'm not supposed to. How am I supposed to feel about him? Then you have Mary Lou, who, like you say, is down to earth, salt of the earth, but she's an alcoholic, and they introduce these sort of other these other issues with her. And so but they all feel like normal people. And then Farnsworth as well. He's a lawyer and a capitalist, and you find that he's all about the money. But then he has this really sort of comfortable, openly gay relationship with this guy, and they're a really nice couple.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, and you're like, so what I like about this film is, like, again, all these people, and it's a very weird film, but all the people seem multiple dimensions. They're authentic. They feel like, and that potentially, Farnsworth's fate and his partner's fate is really, again, like, you're a bit like, oh crap, that's a tough ending, but which we'll get to in a bit. But these three figures, they have lives of their own, and that's what I found fascinating as well, is they're not just introduced into the plot, you're sort of given bits about them as well.
Well, I mean, so I also thought the handling of Farnsworth homosexual relationship was fantastic, and you cannot imagine that this was 1976, where that's not the principle of the plot. It's just not that big of a deal.
It's never mentioned. They're just together.
Right. Yeah. And it's, in fact, I think it seems so ahead of its time. The Bryce thing, you're first introduced to him as he's sleeping with these girls, and fooling around with them. And you don't even know who this character is yet.
Yeah.
And so in a movie that's already jarring, it's like, who is this guy and why are we watching like sex hijinks? But I do feel like that's a little bit of a cliche. I mean, I went to a private liberal arts school where in the 90s it was still completely normal for professors to get with students, and it just wasn't talked about. And today, that's a much bigger deal. And not that it doesn't happen, but there are depending on the school, there are different ethical guides about that, and certainly, you know, the least restrictive is still that you should never have any power over that person. They
Mm.
cannot be your student. If they are, you have to disclose it and have somebody proctor the stuff, and you know, there's no favoritism. You know, that's the minimal
Yeah.
standard that exists today. But this was a different era, and that did go on. But I also feel like that's a little bit of a cliche that he's sort of this like hypersexualized, you know, sort of character who then it's interesting that he drops it as soon as he has this opportunity with World Enterprises, as if, you know, I mean, for my tastes, you know, coming from a professorial family, it's a little bit like those who can't do teach. And so the young girls are a consolation prize for being a bitter professor who knows that you're super smart, but what you're going to do is, you know, lecture people about, you know, basic stuff for the rest of your life. And, you know, this is the sort of consolation prize. And when he's given like a capitalist chance, he doesn't need that anymore. I mean, I found that potentially offensive in its implications.
Mm-hmm.
But I did want to say that both the presentation of sexuality between, including, you know, the gross slime and, you know, just, I mean, our human bodies are weird, right? And sexuality is weird, and it has edges, and it's bizarre. All four of these characters have an interesting sexuality, and sex is presented in this film in this very matter-of-fact way that can be weird, whether it's homosexuality or, you know, chasing after, you know, students, or, you know, Mary Lou and Tommy. Sex is just a part of this movie, but it's never salacious. It's never highlighted. It's just a part of human life and a part of alien life. And I love that about this movie. Most movies, either that's the point, you know, it's Fatal Attraction and it's about an exploration of that, or it's nobody ever has sex, you know, or there's one scene and it's the most vanilla, like, you know, oddly passionate for a married couple, you know, and then you'll never see it again. And it's like, I don't know. This kind of like frank presentation of sexuality as part of life is, again, massively ahead of its time.
Yes, no, I agree. And it gives them all, because it's not the principal part or even a major plot point, to be perfectly honest, like, it just gives all the characters depth, because it's just a part of them, and you just carry on. And it is fascinating to sort of see how that sort of, you know, it almost isn't explored. It just happens. But yeah, one of the things to go back to sort of those characters though is, and you make a good point about Bryce and this thing of him becoming, because he makes a point, doesn't he? He says, you know, I look at these 18-year-olds now and I'm not interested. I've got this new challenge for my mind. And so that sort of, I can see what you're saying about this idea of, like, you know, now I can actually go and do something now rather than being the teacher. And you're like, well, no, you are still doing something in the school. I'm pretty sure you're busy. But even so, when he does, I love the fact that it sort of flips, because he then goes to this office and then they call him up and they're like, how's it going? He's like, I've been here 3 weeks. I don't really know what I'm here for. Like, no one seems to talk to me about this thing. Like, what am I supposed to be doing? And again, you know, we probably had those experiences as well. You start a job and you're like, I'm not entirely sure how all this fits together. And so again, I like that there's these sort of regularities of things going on. However, there are also scenes that sort of come out of left field as incredibly odd. Not just the flashbacks of his home planet, which we'll get to in a second, but there's a scene when Tommy is traveling with Mary Lou in the awesome limousine that he has, the sort of purpley blue limousine thing he has, and they're going past a field, and I don't know whether he's been, because he says at one point when he drinks he can see things. It gives him sort of, he can see things. But they're traveling along a field, and he sort of gets out of his seat and he's looking out the window, and then all of a sudden you see these sort of Pilgrim era people outside their house, and you're like, what's going on? Can he? Is it like? Can he perceive what would have existed in the past? Maybe that's what it is, because you don't see any interaction at first; they're just there. Is he able to perceive? Does his sight transcend the fourth dimension? Like, can he see? This is what there was a village here, and I can see it. In a sort of almost like a psychic way. That's how I interpret the scene to begin with, and then all of a sudden they react to the car, and you see the car disappear in a flash.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, I don't know if he's just had a time slip. Is this supposed to be a psychic event? Is it something else? Does it impact on the plot? No. Okay. And then they move on. It's never returned to again, and that sort of thing. And there's a couple of those, and there's some stuff similar to that at the end. I'm like, I'm just going to enjoy it. Those scenes are interesting. But I don't know. I mean, that scene in particular, did that strike you at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I had the exact same reaction where initially I thought he's seeing this, and then it's clear something else is going on. But like I was mentioning that he doesn't seem to have superpowers. Well, we don't know. We just there's so much about him that we don't know, and so for me, that scene I sort of forget about. For a scene that you shouldn't be forgetting about that.
Yeah.
It's kind of forgettable. But the point of it is, to me, like, we don't really know who Tommy is. We don't really know what the species is, or how they perceive us, or why he's so aloof. And, there's something going on there, but we're never going to be let in to understand the alien.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's interesting about him as an alien is when there's a good scene, and it's obviously it's done through reverse photography, but you see him in his alien form, and he removes his hair, and he moves his ears, and his eyebrows, and he takes out his eyes, and he's got these yellow cat-like eyes and stuff, and he clearly takes off his penis, and much like Seth Brundle, probably puts it in a jar.
God.
But then obviously he returns to his human presentation. Later in the film, he's abducted by it's arranged by Bryce, and I'm not entirely sure whether it's the new there's the black Bernie Casey is the actor who I like in a lot of the things. Who's like, so it's like almost like industrial espionage. Like, he's trying to take over like World Enterprises, and he kills Farnsworth and his partner. And then I'm not entirely sure like if he owns the company or something, because there's like something happens, and but that's when Tommy is taken by the company, and he's not taken by the government. He's taken by, and Bryce is there, and he's on a table, and they're investigating it, and they're all talking to him, and they keep saying to him, "We're going to do these tests." But at one point, they're trying to cut his nipples off.
Yeah.
And one of the doctors just says to him, "Don't worry, you're normal." And it's a really bizarre line, because it's like, it's like, well, who are you trying to convince? Like, you're cutting his nipples off. Like, what's going on? And obviously he's trapped then in this building, which you're not entirely sure what it is, but it's got a wooded a table tennis thing that looks like it's in the wood. But it seems to be in a house with like a boarded up doors and all this other stuff.
Like, it's some posh settings that they wind up giving him.
Yeah.
And yet it's this sort of like gilded cage sort of prison. And it is strange to think, like, why are you spending all this money to, like, you're not probing him for information that you need to. I mean, it seems as if, like, my take, like, I think that Mr. Peters' character is definitely underdeveloped. I mean,
yeah.
He's like another character who could have been really interesting, but he's introduced so late, and you think he's going to be like another Bryce who's kind of introduced, a bit later on, and then becomes important. And we just see almost nothing of Mr. Peters. And I thought that he worked for like a rival company of some sort that, but it's not at all clear. It's clear it's not the government.
No.
It might be a coup within, World Enterprises, or, but it does seem as if like that, I mean, I also was puzzled by why these tests are not more successful. Like
Yeah.
how long does it take to be like, you know what? I know none of us want to touch this dude's junk, but that's not part of his anatomy. Okay?
Look, it
Like,
unscrews.
take
Look,
the
it comes
fuse
off. Well, that's it, because you see, and there is a couple of scenes where this is where like they've broken Tommy. Before we get to that, you're talking about the ahead of its time as well, and it just not making a point. You talk about Mr. Peters or Mr. Peterson, I can't remember his name, but the Bunny Casey character, like, in an interracial marriage, not mentioned, doesn't matter. But again, I was like, this is 76. This is quite interesting. They're doing these taboos, but they're not pointing them out. They're just sort of doing them and going like, and we're off. And you go, all right, cool, move on. All right, not a problem. So I do
less
find
of
that
a deal about it than a TV show would today.
Yeah. In 76, and they're just like, yeah, he's just married to he and his wife, and they've got 2 kids, and you see a whole sort of like, where they're putting the kids to bed and they're going to bed and sort of they're talking about stuff, and it's like, it's just a family scene. But there's, if that was a show now, there'd be this like, and we've created this interracial couple. Like in 76, Nicholas Rowe didn't give a shit. Like, it was just a thing. It's bizarre. But when you see Tommy, like, he has that bed hanging on chains, and they wake him up and they get him up, and they give him an injection. And several people are sort of asking him questions at the same time. And it just focuses on Tommy, and he's sort of saying, "Look, I've told you this before," and he's really sort of just repeating again. He's like, "I've told you this before. I came on my own. I don't know anybody else. I don't know what's going on. I'm here for this purpose. I'm not here to hurt anybody." And you can see almost like, although he's being, like you say, he's not giving a massive. Again, this is why I think I like it being Bowie, not some actor who would try and give it all this stuff, give it some inflection. He's just going, but you can see there's a definite like, I'm broken. Like, I'm just going to keep drinking my gin, and there's nothing else to do about this. Is interesting. Like, again, like, they take him and they abduct him and they're doing experiments. Like you say, I hadn't thought about that. Like, yeah, they don't prove anything. In fact, they ruin an experiment, because he says, like, look, I'll take out. They're about to take. He said the tweezers. He says, "Look, I'll take up my eyes." Because I was going to say, one of the things they do with the scene is when he is putting his stuff back on, he puts like a plastic eye covering back into his eye, and to film it, they clearly
like contacts, right?
Yeah, but like big fucking because. But when he's doing it in the film, to see how they do it, they've cleared it with reverse photography because it sort of zaps back into his eye. But even to do that, Bowie must have had that in his eye, and I was like, oh no, that's gross. So they X-ray his eyes, and he's like, no, I can see X-rays. It'll hurt my eyes, and it'll damage these eye coverings, and they force him to have it, and that's when he says, like, he says, well, I can't take them off now. You've knackered them.
Yeah.
And so that was, again, like, there's all these sort of like frustrations he has, but he never really fights back. He's just like, oh, I'll do it. Come on, please. I'm begging you, just let me do it. Like you said, he's not. It's he's not going to be like, all right, I have all these superpowers and now I've got telekinesis and I'm going to blast you around the room. He's just like, no, I'm a skinny dude, and you're beating me up.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he's not resisting, but he's not giving information. It feels to me like there's this kind of like dance going on there, where, he's willing to say, I came alone and all this stuff, but he's not explaining his anatomy and how it works. It's like, okay, I'll tell these people just what I like. He could have volunteered to take out, his eyes early on and say, like, all right, look, guys, full disclosure, I'm an alien. I'm going to take my eyes off. I'm going to take my face off. I'm going to take my penis off. He doesn't do that. It's like he's playing this kind of cat and mouse game where he's answering honestly, but he's not volunteering stuff. And they want more information, and they don't trust him, not perhaps naturally enough. And yeah, but I mean, I like that dynamic. Again, it's strange. It's, you're watching it and it's just like, okay, I don't know how to take this. But the thing that bothers me is, you'd think, like, if you're going to X-ray his eyes, X-ray his body, see what his anatomy looks like, how do you not notice that parts of his anatomy, including his face, are artificial? Even if there's blood coursing through them, it's some sort of like replicant advanced stuff. Okay, fine, but I don't know. I mean, I feel like they would have gotten further with that. Although I do love that they just like abandoned the project, right? And it's like
Yeah.
they're just like, yeah, it's like very corporate. You and I like talking about like being in a cubicle and going like, I've been here for 3 weeks, not sure why I'm doing any
Yeah.
of these things I'm tasked with. It's like, then I've been here 10 years, or 5 years. This project that I'm working on was basically stopped 3 years ago. Nobody's concerned with Bowie anymore.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's that sort of corporate momentum of like, yeah, we do have that house that we pay for, that, we got what we were going to get from him and we lost interest.
Yeah, and this is where the sort of the passage of time becomes incredibly evident. And again, like, I wasn't sure how long he was in there being experimented on, because it starts with when you first see him, or there's a scene at the very beginning of this section of the film where he's being experimented on, and Bryce is there, and he's calling to him as a friend, as he's like, help me, get me out of this. And that's quite sad because he walks off and he leaves him there, which again is that idea of the coldness of the need to dissect and to understand is going to sort of like overcome a potential friendship that he's grown, which is quite sad. But then he's obviously there, and he's indulging in alcoholism and whatever else. And then Mary Lou sort of just walks in.
Yes.
And I love that it's almost done like a comedy. Like there are moments in this where timing is spot on. Like he's building himself a gin and tonic, and she walks through the doors, and she's looking around, and he's like, "What the? How did you get in?" And he says to her, "How did you get it in?" And she's like, "Well, through the front door." And he just sort of like totters off through the house. He's like, "What?" And it's locked again. And it's just fascinating. Like, well, then she sort of lives with him for a period, and but they've aged her. Like she's now looking older. And she lives with him for a bit, and again they have this weird sort of sex scene where they're firing blanks at each other. I didn't know if that was supposed to be like a euphemism for anything, but like, he threatens to kill her, and then sort of like he fires it, and then it's like, oh no, it's full of blanks. Ha ha ha! Let's shoot at each other. And that goes on for
while we screw.
Yeah, but that seemed to go on for like
Who
5
hasn't
minutes.
done that?
Yeah. But again, how long are they there together? Because then she sort of disappears, and then he finds that the door's open, and that's sort of where it sort of comes to a bit of an end, really, for him at least. And so yeah, there's this idea of like, did someone just go? He can't come back to World, Enterprise. He's sort of like, he's now on the outside of that. But we can't keep him any longer, so we're just going to sort of leave a bit like I really don't like this cat, so we're going to leave this door open to see if they go away.
So the way I read it, I mean, I think it's probably days that she's with him. But the way that I read it is, like he says about the gun, like, he's drunk and he's just like, this is what I have in my life, right? Like I asked for a gun and they gave me a gun, like I have what I want, but I'm a prisoner. And so Mary Lou is, brought to him, or, maybe he's asked for her and we haven't seen it, or she's inquired. We don't really know. But it's clear at this point that like that house still has overseers. There's still people in the corporate structure that like are basically tasked with monitoring him, bring him a gun, open the door for Mary Lou, or leave it unlocked for her. But that same corporation is not interested in really probing him for information anymore.
No,
they're done with him. So my reading is like, okay, we're in that sort of late stage of the corporation isn't interested, and that basically somebody screws up, and those, I imagine just like two very much kind of like Alan Moore characters who are just sort of like working stiffs, you know, who are tasked with you know, monitoring him and bringing him, you know, his booze. It's a thankless, horrible job. And one of them just opens and they just sit and chat about how dumb their job is.
Yeah.
And one of them forgot to lock it after Mary Lou came. And that's why he escapes. And it kind of does, and probably the corporation doesn't notice or care anyway, because he's old, you know, he's like, we've got top men on it. He's in a warehouse basically at the end of Indiana Jones.
Yeah. But he's not. The thing is, when he does go out, because you learn, like, you know, that when he gets out of that building, like, it's not like he stays incognito. Although he looks like he is trying to stay incognito, he goes and releases a bloody album. He basically goes off and becomes David Bowie. And again, like, this is one of the bizarrest things. There's two bits actually, and we'll get to this final scene, and we'll go back onto other bits. But so basically, after he's escaped, you then go onto a little section, and again, I'm assuming it's some years later again, because they've aged Mary Lou and Bryce. They are together. It's Christmas, and they've been drinking. And then Bryce goes out, goes to a record shop, and for some reason he picks out an album called The Visitor and asks to listen to a track. I don't know how he came across this album. I don't know how he identified it as being the thing. He just sort of does. However, and again, this is an interesting thing. They obviously filmed in a real record shop. If you watch that scene, there are some Bowie albums in the background.
I did not notice that.
Yeah, I saw one. And I was like, hang on a minute, and I googled it, and there are.
Yeah.
So David Bowie exists in that universe, which is bizarre in itself. But again, like, if you're going to have the end of your film contain the listening of a musical track on an album, and your star of your film is David Bowie, and you don't have a musical track sang by David Bowie in the film, I sort of feel like that was a missed opportunity. Even a snippet of a song or something, it felt really bizarre for me to have. I don't know, maybe that's my corporate side thinking.
No, I mean, I know what you're saying. I think that, like, you know, gut reaction, first impression, right? Absolutely. And, you know, like, Ziggy Stardust, you know, that whole album is a sort of like semi-concept album of, you know, the story of Ziggy Stardust, and supposedly all the songs are, you know, part of that narrative. It's a very lucid narrative, but, you know, but they never made a movie about it. So, you know, this is obviously, especially with that ending, you know, with him recording an album, touches on all of that. The flip side is, you know, so I agree with you. It's weird. And apparently they were going to have Bowie songs in it, and then contracts fell through or something. But the flip side of it is that I could make the counter argument. And the counter argument is, I like this movie as it is. And I feel like that if this had like a David Bowie soundtrack, especially songs, first of all, a lot of David Bowie music is not as good as everyone remembers.
Oh, yeah.
You know, some of it is fantastic. It's certainly, you know, I mean, I think especially I'm a huge fan of this sort of like 70s, you know, what Lou Reed was doing and Bowie was doing in terms of questioning, you know, gender and presentation on stage and outsider stuff and doing weird experimental stuff. Having said that, those songs could have made this sort of like, hey, it's the David Bowie show, you know, like, get it? Yeah. That's David Bowie, you know. And I know what you're saying there about the ending, but like, if that song is Ziggy Stardust, then it's like, it reduces The Man Who Fell to Earth to like the origin of Ziggy Stardust, you know, or, you know, this is how that song got written.
Which is, well, I actually had my notes. Does he become David Bowie? Like, because again, like, it's years between him escaping that apartment and him meeting Bryce again. So I was like, does he go off and become a pop star? Like, you know, because he doesn't age. Like, all the other characters age, he doesn't.
Yes.
So that was the sort of, I got to the end and I was like, have I just seen like a, is this meant to be like a biography film? Is this some like weird? But yeah, no, I like the ending as well, because the other thing I like about the ending again is that sort of frankness of the character of Tommy. Like he meets him at this table, and Bryce is like, you know, I don't know how he sort of tracked him down. It's not really clear. I don't think it really matters. But his old, like Tommy's opinion is just like, well, do you want any money? Do you need anything? You know, I've still got money. I'm still rich. You know, so if you need anything, just let me know. Like I can't really be your friend anymore, but like if you need anything, just let me know. And that's it, really. And it's sort of like, you know, so it's not, there's not this sort of, again, like if this was a Hollywood movie, like there'd be this sentimental, you know, reconciliation, or they'd both have this sort of like touching monologue reflecting on everything that's happened. And he's a
weren't
bit,
always good to each other, but the years have passed, and you know that was the time of my life, Tom.
yeah,
You know?
exactly. Like water under the bridge, but in reflection, like, yeah, you were the best thing that ever happened to me, kind of thing. Like, there isn't that. Like,
No.
it's clear that like Tommy's still got PTSD. He's still drinking. He's in fact, if anything, he's got worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, you know, no, at the end of this film, like there is no redemption, there is no reconciliation. He's failed his mission, so we're going to get to his family in a second. And I love the fact that it ends with him literally just like dipping his head, and he's like, yeah, no.
Yeah, he's like, does he fall unconscious? He's just a drunk. He's just kind of destroyed. That's sort of the finale.
Yeah, because again, because the song that he wrote, and he said obviously he refers to the album, but there's a song on it in particular that apparently gives him away as being the Tommy Newton that they know. And he says, oh, did you write that for Mary Lou? He says, no, I wrote it for my wife.
Yeah.
She'll hear it on the radio, and he's and Tommy and Bryce sort of says, well, we all get most things through the radios these days, and I think he's trying to sort of be lighthearted, but it's this clear thing of like they've obviously, you know, they've explained previously that on Tommy's planet they've experienced Earth culture through radio waves and television waves. You know, so he's seen these things, so he's done it, so it's going to go out into the ether and she's going to hear it. But he obviously knows she's dead. And so it's this really somber ending that's really, really sort of like.
Well, I mean, I love somber endings.
No, I do like it. Yeah,
I love everything about this ending. It seems to me that, yeah, I mean, so I love that he is not going to build another rocket ship, right? Like he's given up on the spaceship, and all that's left to him is just to send a message, to hope that a message could get to his wife, even, you know, like you said, I mean, by the time it gets there, she's going to be dead. But maybe not. Maybe the film knows that. Maybe the film doesn't. But that seems really sad. But I mean, you know, it seems correct. I love that he's sort of been forgotten by. I mean, it's strange that he's recorded this album, but at least there's no implication that it's a tremendous hit. Another thing that I love is, like you said, you know, they can't go back, and Tommy offers money, and he says, well, what do you think of the album? And Bryce says he didn't like it, which I love. You know, it's
not for me. He's a bit like, not for me.
Yeah.
And that's where he says, well, I didn't make it for you.
Right.
Which is a great statement.
A little defensive, right? But, you know, I mean, I love that interaction. And again, it's the opposite of what you would expect from the sort of sentimental Hollywood, right? Like, you know, 2 thumbs up, like it's like nothing Earth has heard before. You know, none of the movie doesn't do any of that. I mean, it seems as if, I think that his metabolism can't process alcohol, you know, properly, and that he is more prone to alcoholism than we humans are. And he seems completely dependent, if not like a functioning alcoholic kind of thing. But, you know, I love that I love that Bryce doesn't like the album. I love that this is the recompense left to him is to send a message to his wife. And I love that, like you said, it avoids that sort of sentimentality in the same way that the last conversation with Mary Lou does. It's like, yes, we went through this thing. That whole conversation with Mary Lou ends with, them saying that they don't love each other anymore. Like they reunited for this playful sex, and it was good to see each other. But whatever we had is past, and I don't feel it anymore. And maybe it was stupid all along. And there's no resentment. There's no anger there. There's no lashing out and throwing things. And I feel like that ending with Bryce kind of parallels that.
Yeah, but it feels, again, like you say, about natural. Like, that sometimes that happens with friends. When you do, you sort of go, yeah, you meet up after years and you go, oh, good to see you. And that's it. You don't sort of go, it's not like every sort of a Hollywood moment when you sort of see someone and go, even after 12 years, it's like we've never been apart. It's sort of like, oh, no, it is. That's a decade. Because one of the questions about the finale before we move on to the next point is, Tommy asks Bryce, he says, do you see much of Mary Lou? And Bryce says, no, I don't, really. But we've seen that he's together with her, and I'm not entirely sure is to say that he's moved on, or is he lying to sort of save Tommy?
He's lying.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
To sort of not have to explain that. They're like, oh, no, I'm with her now. So, yeah, but the other thing is, we talk about this thing of him going out to his family or to his wife. He's sending this message. One of the things you see throughout the film, or at least sort of like the second sort of half of the film, are these flashes of he and his... Well, it starts off, there were sections of he and his family, his wife and 2 children, on this planet, this desolate desert planet. And there's like a train monorail kind of thing with a canopy over it and stuff.
And then it's like a mobile house, like on this kind of like, it looks really good, but like the monorail motion is kind of like cheap old Star Wars kind of like.
Yeah, you can sort of tell they were like, right, this is like 4 minutes of film, so let's not spend too much on it.
There's like a golf cart inside that.
Clearly. But you see these flashes. There's a bit with him together, him leaving, and then there's sort of like you see her, or they see his partner, his wife with the 2 children, and then it's sort of them waiting, and then eventually it's them, the one of them crawling towards her, but the other one dead across her lap, and then he collapses, and then eventually it goes back later on to see them just lying there. And then the final thing is like the sand has overtaken them and they're just there and things have collapsed around them. The question I have is, did that really happen? Or is that Tommy's guilt playing out in his own mind? Is him going, I left them behind to this fate. And so we're seeing what he's thinking about. And I suppose you can see it either way, but I was just curious as to how you interpreted that.
I mean, I think there's no reason to think that it's not really happening. Having said that, saying that that's just his guilt, and we have seen, like, we don't know what's going on with those pilgrims, right? Mm-hmm. So is he seeing this? Is he, does he have some connection to her across the stars? I don't know. I mean, is this part of his seeing power? Yeah, it's ambiguous, and you can see it that way if you want. I mean, I tend to think there's no reason not to think that it's
real,
accurate. Yeah, that it's accurate.
And
I like that. I love that it's sad.
Well, I like the fact it was sad, but without. Again, this is a thing of modern cinema, but there's no like rousing, sad music sort of, swelling up behind it. Again, like with a lot of other things, it's just very matter of fact. In fact, I don't think there's any score behind it at all in several of them, apart from the wind whistling by. It's just, again, very stark and raw of this family unit dying of dehydration or starvation. And yes, it is. It's really sad. I mean, this is obviously a really somber film, but it's just interesting, like you said, because they pop up at interesting times as well. Like, and I can't remember exactly, but it's not like they're not inserts between scenes.
Right.
They actually crop up during
During.
scenes.
Yes.
And so at times that you see things and you're like, he's doing other things, or it might be, you know, I can't remember when they are now, but it feels like when they appear is important.
Yes. It
But
feels
I
like
was-
it feels like he is imagining and thinking of them,
Mm,
but there's no reason to think that this isn't occurring.
didn't happen.
Yeah, like at first I thought this is what he's remembering, right? And then it seems the plot is advancing on the alien planet, and it's clear like, oh, he's not remembering. He's either seeing this or we're cutting to what's happening there.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. But I think that invites us to wonder, you know, like, and through that juxtaposition, right? It's like Eisensteinian, you know, juxtaposition that it makes us wonder about what those scenes are supposed to be, but it also makes us imagine that he is homesick without Bowie ever having to project emotion.
And that's the thing. Like this film does is it conveys emotion for the Tommy character without really Tommy having to convey emotion, and it does it on several occasions. Yeah, because again, one of the things, yeah, and I do find those scenes fascinating again, because again, and also like so the costuming and the setup and everything is really simplistic. Like they haven't gone, and obviously there'd be a budgetary thing and a sort of technology thing, like, you know, but the suits they're wearing, made me think of June. You know, again, that thing of like the suits are clearly designed. They've got these little things around them with sort of a liquid moving around inside them and stuff. And I was going like, okay, so they've got like that sort of suit. So I was like, again, like, you know, yeah. And I was like, okay, again, there's some cool ideas in this where like if this had been a modern take, you'd have probably spent the first 20 minutes on that planet. You know, exploring that culture and that sort of thing. And yeah, fine, but I'm so glad that it's left so ambiguous and so sort of like, I don't know how that society works. He never sits down and explains it. Like at no point does he say, again, like there's never that conversation with post him revealing himself to Mary Lou where he's like, well, on my planet this is a sign of affection, or you know, this is how we do things, and the High Council sent me to find water, or any of that shit. Like it's not in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I don't need you know, I don't need Kal-El fighting dragons for the first 30 minutes of the Man Who Fell to Earth remake. No, and I was reminded of like, you know, I mean, famously, supposedly, what's his name of The Godfather remarked filming Superman, you know, like
Brando.
Just right, Marlon Brando. Thank you. He's so forgettable. Just a joke. That you know, why don't you just film a potted plant or something? Who knows what Kryptonians look like? But that movie was an attempt to, like, that alien planet. You see more of it, but it does not explain really how it works. No. And it's much more serious science fiction. And I feel like, you know, this is even more in that direction of embracing that ambiguity. Don't explain it, show it. And I had a similar reaction to those scenes. That sort of my first reaction was like, that looks a little cheap. Yeah. But then I get used to it and I'm like, no, it's conveying what it needs to convey, you know, in a very minimalist way. I don't need it to be, you know, an elaborate thing. It's really about the emotional core of that family. And, you know, for me, what I really like about that is assuming that does really happen. You know, not only is it sad, but like it's that sense of inevitability, right? Like, how many times have we seen, you know, I mean, it's Krypton, right? You know, doomed planet, a desperate attempt to get clear. You know, Earth has got to go out into the galaxy to save itself. You know, here's a planet where, yeah, it's dying. It needs water. He's presumably bravely volunteered. You know, we don't know. We don't know anything about how that worked. But most of those missions are not going to be successful.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, look, we always knew this was a long shot, and now I'm stranded here. And I think it's one of the last lines where he says, I think Bryce says something like, I'm sorry about what happened to you. And it's as close as he comes to a sort of like emotional reconciliation. And Tommy, drunk off his ass, says like, we would have done the same thing to you.
Yeah.
You know?
I love this. If you'd have come to our place, this is the phrase he uses. We'd have probably done the same if you'd come to our place. And it's a very flippant comment, but it's true. You know, yeah, we'd have probably experimented. If we'd have been in a better situation, we'd have probably done the same to you.
Sure. Like,
yeah.
we're not some enlightened. I mean, that's as close as you get to like understanding his culture. That no, they're not some enlightened culture either. They have the same stupid stuff that we do.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, actually. Yeah, because you know, like you say, the only thing that Tommy has is knowledge of technology. So he's, you know, and you don't know his role on the other planet. You know, there's no sort of thing of like, I was a scientist and all this other stuff, or I was a warrior. He just knows this stuff. So he may have learned it before he left. And then that's it. Like you say, he's got abilities, but they're not like superpowers. It's not like he can go off and go become like, well, I can't get home, but now I can become, you know, Bowie Man or anything like that. Like he's stuck. You know, he is just becoming. He becomes one of us, really. Sort of. The only interesting thing I took away from the ending as well is that obviously he doesn't seem to age.
Yeah.
So there's a different biology there. And there was a part of me that was like, I left the film and I was like, I wonder where he is now. Like, you know, obviously we can't have, you know, tragically we couldn't have David Bowie back, and obviously he did age. But what would Tommy have done like 50 years later?
I don't think he's going to do anything. I mean,
that's what I mean. Yeah, I think
because he's just gonna he's probably gonna die in some alcohol related accident, and people are going to, you know, I mean, you know, maybe somebody finds out his anatomy or not. Maybe, you know, there's, you know, Bryce and Mary Lou are fighting for, you know, his inheritance or whatever, or it goes to the state. Who knows? But I mean, I think that's, I would love to, you know, I would love to see an old Bowie in The Man Who Fell to Earth too. But I mean, no, I mean, I feel as if that's supposed to be the end of his story. Yeah. And it's him collapsing. He could even have died at that moment, right? I mean, he collapses in a stupor. And I think the point is, like, he's not going to get better, right? Like, this is as far, the story has gone in so many different arcs and new directions. If they had another arc, they would have shown it to us.
Yeah.
This is the real end of the line, whether he's dead or not.
Yeah, no, it's the end of his story. Like, he doesn't impact anything anymore going forwards. Which is you know would probably most definitely be true. Going back to the authenticity, like there's no great redemption or great resurrection to become this, you know, this Messiah figure. Yeah, and I like that there isn't that thing like that, or in that realism state of like, no, sometimes it's just you hit bottom and you stay at the bottom, and that's it.
Well, what's left for him? I mean, you know, his wife is gone. You know, I mean, the only, you know, relationships he's ever been able to have were with Bryce and Mary Lou. Those have clearly run their course. Probably they were both stupid anyway. You know, like you took your best shot, but he's hopelessly addicted to alcohol. It's not even clear that he's physically recovering from that, given his physiology. What is he going to do?
No, that is the end. I mean, we'll go. Yeah, I mean that's the end of the film. That is the end of that story. But let's go back, because there's two of the things that sort of I wanted to cover in my notes. There is a scene. Obviously, he's building a rocket, and he's building the thing, but just before he's abducted, you see him. There's this big press event, and he's in this weird suit and sort of thing. Is he? That's a test run for the ship, right? That was what I took as.
I don't know that it's a test run, but it's clearly public and it's scheduled to take off, right?
Mm.
Whether it's a test or, he's going on the maiden flight but he's going to be on it and it's going to take off imminently.
Yeah. And then he gets abducted, and then that sort of goes by the wayside. So, one of the things I was curious about is, though, he's obviously had to invent technology to get to that point. Like, he's had all these patents of photography and sound and all this sort of thing. So he's introduced like basics. There's a great thing where they're having conversations with Kodak. We have the contracts with Kodak they mentioned at one point. So they're looking at all this stuff. But there's no mention beyond that point of how this technology has impacted our world.
Yes.
And again, like you say, it's not important to the story. It's not important. And again, this is just the way this film is shot. At the end of the film, when you see Bryce and Mary Lou leaving that he's dressed as Santa and they're leaving the thing, there's a billboard that clearly states 1976.
Yeah.
So
it's clearly an alternate timeline, right? I mean, it's an alternate history. Yeah.
But so for me, I was trying to figure out that timeline. So if that ending is 76, like how long has this taken place? Did this start in the 50s? But they're all dressed like in the 70s throughout.
Yes.
Like they haven't attempted to say we start at this point and we go through to this point. And it clearly is, like I say, it's an alternative timeline where, again, I'd be interested to see, well, how is that? Does that technology advance? Do we get to be without him? Probably without him, do we advance? Again, it's not important to this story, but it was just in my head. And I was like, well, he's introduced a whole bunch of stuff to this world that people are now looking at, and they're now going to be researching, and they're going to use that to get to the next thing and the next thing, and it will take them down a different divergent line. So I was curious about that from a time standpoint, because it ends in 76. When did it start, and how does that work?
I found myself thinking about that too. And I love alternate history stuff. What I also found myself thinking is, like, we don't get a sense of the outer world, right? So if there's, one of the things that does feel incongruent to me, like, I can imagine, like, oh, okay, right, we're in an alternate history. Clearly, this is not our universe anymore. But when it gets to the point of a spaceship taking off, right, that's getting press coverage. And he is, famously reclusive. He's on TV about to take off. What did they tell the media? Like, oh, he decided not to do that. Did that spaceship ever take off, or did they disassemble it for reverse engineering the technology, because he's kept it all secret? I mean, how did they explain that to the world? And so, there is this question that you're getting at of, like, what does it feel like to be in that world? And so I might suggest, if there is, what we need a Denis Villeneuve to make The Man Who Fell to Earth 2, and we'll CGI David Bowie, and he'll be a minor part of, like, it'll be set in this alternate universe, but actually seeing this history and what's happened to, World Enterprises. And they'll find the CGI David Bowie for a cameo at some point before the climax. But, I mean, that is a fascinating question. And I would like to see something like that.
Yeah, and that's what it's... Because I love this idea of aging technology, and, the ideas of futurism from different periods, this idea of how technology advances, especially around this time, when if you watch... everything from the original Star Trek through to this kind of things, and people are still like, yes, this is the year 2015, and we still have a tape decks. And we got way beyond that very quickly. So I'd love to see that idea of how this alternate timeline continued. Like, what does 2021 look like after these events? But the other thing that was interesting, obviously, watching this film at this time, we've been quite lucky with some of the stuff we've done where it's been quite sort of relevant. And this will come out in in several weeks. But as of the recording of this film, we've had 2 corporate industrialists using private enterprise, using their own companies to build rockets to attempt to go into space. We've had Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos and his flying penis rocket. And so it just felt weird to me, because like watching this film again, when you sort of like, no, NASA will take you to the, there's there, it's these big government agencies, they're the ones focusing and they've got the money to do this, and then all of a sudden we've now got SpaceX with Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos is doing his, and Richard Branson's been trying to do it for years, and they're getting there. This idea of now, like you said, being ahead of its time, this idea of this corporate recluse, this techno genius corporate recluse taking himself to space in 1976, is
50 years ahead of its time, right? And the near total collapse of NASA as, in 76, we were still going to the moon, I mean, that was like the tail end of the moon flights.
Yeah, it just felt incredibly prescient, and sort of like, watching this, but then seeing, and again, this is I don't know how, but seeing the types of people that make it to that level, you have Richard Branson, your Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk's, they're the 3 top ones really, are a certain type of person. I mean, Richard Branson now owns his own island and lives on it as a tax haven more than anything. But I don't know. It felt like a commentary. It felt like a satire and a commentary on something like way before its time, really.
Yeah, and I think if I'm bothered by like the presentation of the professor as a little bit of a cliche and a condemnation of academia, there is that potential like Ayn Randian reading of this that says, golly gee, Einstein and Leonardo were aliens, they were visitors too, and all of our great geniuses are, actually these tremendous people who alone propel society forward, and Bezos or Branson are these guys, which is obviously just horrifying that anyone would think that. Having said that, I had a deep conversation with my friend Gabriel, who's 28, and I mean, if you're a millennial, we're completely fucked, right? I mean, global warming, Florida is going to be half underwater in your lifetime, like we're going to have wars over water, and probably, you're never going to own a house, as 4 years of college in America is $100,000, and you can't even, all the middle ground jobs have narrowed out. So you're either making $15 an hour if you're lucky, or you're making 100,000. That mid range has kind of disappeared. So they know they're completely screwed. And, and if anything, he's more of a kind of radical socialist than I am. And having said that, and I consider myself a reformed capitalist. But having said that, he's like, well, my only hope for humanity is if Jeff Bezos decides to like invent technology that fights global warming. And I'm like, dude, I like Bezos, but you have more confidence in him than I do. Yeah. And I don't want to live in a world in which like the survival of humanity depends on, a rich guy like Tommy deciding to do this and then controlling the output. I want NASA to do it.
No, you're right. And one of the things that I thought this, I don't know whether it was a statement that they were trying to make for the story, but the idea of corporate money was the point. Like, because there is a version of this story where he goes direct to the government and actually says exactly that. I will share with you. I'm not going to sell the patents. I'm going to give you these patents if you will allow me to take some water back to my home planet.
Mm-hmm.
But they've learned from television that that's not the thing to do. And so he makes the decision to go through the corporate route. He sees that that's the thing to do. He sees, so in many, I think this film telling us that, no, you're right. I think, you know, Gabriel's right in some respect. This film is saying the same thing. No, private capitalists are the people that, you know, if they've got the moral fortitude to do the right thing, they're where the money is, because the government is blowing it on all kinds of crap. You know, we often talk about our respective countries and our respective governments and how they treat things. You know, just come out the other day, we blew another 4.2 billion on PPE that's completely bloody useless.
Again, because there was a previous scandal like that.
Yeah, well, this one's less of a scandal because there'll be something else tomorrow. You know, Boris said that all the over 8-year-olds can die as well. So they're so fast, you know, quick fire now that it's hard to keep track. But it's, you know, our governments feel incompetent. So you turn to these private individuals that are earning ridiculous amounts of money in the billions and saying, we are in your hands. Use your fortune to find a new energy source, to find a new building material that's cheap, find a new, you know, whatever that we need.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think that's where people are. And, you know, especially some of the younger people, I can imagine that's their mindset.
Well, and I don't think it comes from a pro-capitalist place. I think it comes from a place of sadness and desperation, you know, which is accurate. I mean, which is realistic. And I think, you know, thinking about the movie and its presentation of capitalism, it is as aloof as Bowie is. You know, like it is able to create the spaceship, right? That's able to do amazing things, right? And these technologies seem cool. But Bowie has no altruistic motives. There is absolutely no desire to, like, you know, I mean, we see quite fascinating, you know, like I thought of Network with, you know, this wall of TVs and everything, which I quite like. We see like brief commercials of, like, you know, World Enterprises, where it's like World Enterprises and you. But you know that's just bullshit, because you know Bowie doesn't care. So it's interesting. It's powerful, but it's not romantic.
But don't forget the technology he brings as well. It's all entertainment led to an extent.
Yeah.
He doesn't turn up and say, yeah, I've invented this really efficient solar panel that's a millimeter thick, or I can give you nitrogen powered cars or hydrogen powered cars. He turns up and says, oh yeah, I can show you how to take photographs really fast, or I've got some really cool speakers in the back of my car. Like, it's sound technology and visual technology. That's he's basically coming with the audio visual guy who's basically coming with this new kit. That's it. It's entertainment driven. It's not, you're right, he hasn't come and said, oh, whilst I'm here, I'm going to save your planet. Doesn't give a toss, which weirdly seems counterintuitive to his mission. Like,
right, because he's trying to save his own planet with water. I mean,
yeah. And one of the things I thought was relatively absent was there's no ecological message with this film either. Like, the planet is the planet, and, you know, he drinks water from a stream. He walks, you know, obviously towards the film. There's no sort of, like, he doesn't get here and go, well, your water's screwed as well. Like, there's none of that, or like, we are your future. You know, there's none of this. There's no ecological message. It's just this guy's journey.
And there probably should be. I mean, you know, that does follow, even if it's a line here or there, right? I don't think either of us want this richly ambiguous movie to suddenly become preachy stuff. But that does follow, you know, even if it's a line that says, like, well, you know, your planet might look like mine someday too. You might need to go somewhere to, you know. I think that would help.
Even a comment that, you know, towards Bryce or something, where they're sat in the city and going like, we were here once in our place. You know, we were where you are, and, you know, that sort of thing. But it's not there. There's no ecological message in this film at all. which is fine. I'm not saying it should. I'm not telling them what they should have and shouldn't have, but it does feel odd when his mission is about restoration and preservation of water.
Well, it seems to me that part of the reason why we don't get some of that is because the movie wants to give this presentation of entertainment culture, right? There is this kind of like sub theme throughout of the superficiality of, I mean, him making an album at the end and, all the TVs and praising, how he likes television, it's like it is that very sort of like network thing of it's funny now when we all have answer machines in our pocket that can stream more content than humanity could have dreamed of in 1976. But it's that network thing of like it's the 70s and everything's going crazy. It's all just phony entertainment. Nobody knows what the truth is. And boy, we're past that point.
Yeah. We're post-apocalypse, I think, is probably
Oh yeah.
But I mean, you talk about that thing, and television in this is an interesting one because he starts with a single television, and then when he's with Mary Lou, they add a few more, and then he has that outhouse shack thing for a while. Then he's got a load of TVs, and it gets more and more sort of sophisticated. But there's a moment when he has like a bit of a breakdown, when he's obviously started drinking and stuff, and he's like got all the TVs. And he sort of like, he's doing like, get out my mind, he screams. And you see the screens. And one of the things I noticed on those screens is it's flashing from each of these different monitors that he's got going is they change. So at the beginning, they're all sort of like entertainment. It's sitcoms and this and that. And then all of a sudden it becomes news or image, more savage and raw imagery. Like there's some lions having sex and there's some sort of war and then there's something else and that's the one time where it's sort of like he gets bombarded by masses of negative almost or savage information from the screens, and it's too much for him, but that doesn't stop him. He still goes back to the televisions again later. So but he wants that. Yeah, he wants that positive. Yeah, he's got curiosity, but he wants it to almost be like a positive experience. Like you say, if that's your addiction, you don't want your addiction to be corrupted. And I feel that's what it is for him in many ways. That he doesn't want to give that up.
Well, it's also interesting. I mean, I love sort of music video, sort of rapid cuts and juxtapositions, and I find myself thinking of Network. I found myself thinking, one of my favorite films of all time is Natural Born Killers, and it has a lot of just kind of like close-ups of animals screwing, and just sort of like the rawness of that. But as you were talking, it occurred to me that there is no entertainment on his planet. We don't see, if there is, it's never shown, right? We only see one family, but they don't seem to have televisions. They don't seem to have radio. And so whatever technology, they are technologically superior to us. And yet, just like alcohol, it's like they don't seem to have alcohol. He's subject to that. He didn't evolve with alcohol and his body can't handle it. He didn't evolve with mass media and his body can't handle it.
No, but again, they do say that they've listened to the radio, so they've heard radio waves. And you've made me sort of this idea of how he reacts to this thing of, let's say, mass media, and he gets this addiction to it, and it's trying to absorb it all of it. I want to take all of it in with this wall of televisions and then the alcohol and stuff. It just triggered a memory for me. I haven't watched E.T. in quite some time, but there's a similar thing in E.T. Like E.T. at one point drinks a beer and watches, I think it's Gone with the Wind or something like that, and obviously he psychically links it with Elliot. And I don't know if Spielberg had watched like The Man Who Fell to Earth and was like, I'm going to do my own sort of take on this idea of an alien partaking of our vices of alcohol and in that sort of way. I don't know, but that's obviously like a much more sentimental approach to the same thing, but weirdly but what's more sentimental also has a much more governmental shadow in that's more of a sort of a typical sort of like, you know, the X-Files, the government's going to come and take the aliens. But yeah, it seems almost like a trope, doesn't it? That you know, aliens don't process alcohol in the same way, and so we're going to show that because it's going to be funny. I think really it would be the later.
Well, I find myself thinking of like the Explorers, where you know you have those aliens who are just like gobble the gobble, you know, like we love you know, Earth entertainment, and I always, I mean, that movie does not hold up, but I always found myself, you know, like I always thought it was bizarre that we would imagine like, you know, an alien would be so fascinated by Gunsmoke, you know, like, I mean, it's unwatchable to us today, let alone, you know, can you imagine, you know, I mean, you've got, you know, all this technology. I can't imagine that wouldn't be like, you know, one guy sitting pounding a drum arrhythmically, you know, in terms of its amount of interest.
I would love that. If we were to receive, you know, TV and radio waves from an alien planet, would we become obsessed with their thing? You wouldn't understand it. It's a completely different perspective. It's, you know, you'd be going, what is this show? It'd be more like, it'd be closer to Videodrome than anything else.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but I mean, so I think it's weird, this idea, but it's for some reason in this film it doesn't bother me, and it doesn't go to that Explorers level of like, golly gee, we're obsessed with this. But it's just like, well, you know, he is susceptible to it. But I like what you're saying about how it's presented as a vice tantamount to alcohol. It's that network thing of like, this has become reality to us, and we're more interested in, you know, Laverne and Shirley than we are in our kids, or, you know, the family down the street, which we don't even know their names anymore.
Yeah, which, you know, was it, like you say, was a commentary in the 70s, and if anything has got worse in the 50 years since. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of my thoughts on this film. I mean, you know, I'll give you a chance to sort of your final thoughts, really. But I have to say, this was a really pleasant surprise. You know, I chose this because I was like, yeah, I've heard about this so many times. Know nothing about it. Let's go in. Little trepidatious, but I actually think this was really worth watching, and I actually think I will go back and watch this again. Actually,
I will too. I'm glad you chose it. I mean, you know, I would go. I do think that if you haven't seen this, you have to be prepared for a little bit of a rough beginning, and for it's almost 2.5 hours. I mean, it is slow compared to modern standards. Not Solaris, but you know, it's slow compared to modern standards. Having said that, I think it's a masterpiece. I mean, there are moments where it's rough around the edges, but oh my God, is it ambitious? Is it smart? Is it, you know, I mean, it's remarkable. It's a small cast. And yet it's absolutely fascinating and different, and not different for the sake of being different, but actually different and thoughtful, and, you know, ruminates on these things instead of just giving you a 1-2 punch. I think it's a masterpiece.
Yeah, yeah. There were a few scenes I had to watch over, but more so because I knew we were having this conversation. It's a film you can sit and, like I say, if you can get into the groove of it and have it wash over you, it's an experience, like a true experience. That I would love to sit in the cinema and watch this on the big screen. I watched it on. Unfortunately, I watched it on the tablet, which is fine. You know, I'm now in that time when I can do that. But I think I could easily sit for 2 hours 20 minutes and watch it on the big screen. I would be completely absorbed for that time. As you said, the cast are small, but they're really good. Like, and as well, like, there's people in this film that I know Ironically, I know Rip Torn mainly from Men in Black. You know, he was in the first Men in Black. So. And a few other things later in the 90s, who are much older Rip Torn.
I know he was in Larry Sanders' show.
Yeah,
I love him in that.
Yeah, and like I say, you know, David Bowie. Yeah, he's not giving an Oscar-winning performance; he's giving a Bowie performance, but it works. Like, it works in this film. what I would say is, like, I went into this knowing that Nicholas Roeg had made Don't Look Now, and I love Don't Look Now. I think it's a fantastic film, beautiful film. Again, really ambiguous and bizarre. But this is him taking it to the next level. Like, they almost work in a weird companion piece. I can see them in that way as a director sort of oeuvre. But yeah, it's maybe not in my top 10. I don't think, but it's definitely a film where I'm like, yeah, I'm going back to watch this at some point. And I also think it's one of those films that if you are in different places in your life, in different parts of your life, you will take something different from this film, and you can sort of reflect on it in a different way. And so I think it's worth revisiting for that as well, to come back later on and go, yeah, now I can see that Mary Lou is a different character to how I saw her 10 years ago, or the actions
sympathize with different people.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Bryce made a good decision or a bad decision, or I understand why he made that decision, or all those different things. And so there's so much in this film that you can unpick. And weirdly, the Arrow Video, the Blu-ray company, they do a few books. I've got a couple of them, and they actually have a book about this. And so it's a collection of sort of like 3 or 4 essays on this film. And I always sort of ruminate, do I want that one? I've got some other, there are others, they're very good. Having watched this now, I'm like, no, I need that book. I need that book. I want to dig into that, and I want to have a look at that. So, what have others thought about this film, and how have they sort of dissected it? So, yeah, I'm really chuffed we watched this. I think it was really good. Well done, me.
Yes, amen.
No,
well, I think this is better than the last one, which was me doing one that we hadn't seen. But we liked both of them. But I mean, this one for me was a home run. I do think that viewers have to know that it's not an emotional. If you're expecting, I think most viewers want a sort of like emotionally engaging experience. It's much more cerebral, much more thoughtful. But does have meat to chew on,
Yeah, definitely. I think, but I think also the aloofness of parts of this film trigger emotional elements of other parts of the film. The aloofness of Tommy drives Mary Lou and her response and her psychological state. So there's a lot to take from that, and so I'm really sort of it's a really good film. I'm really pleased about it, and I'm really glad. The good thing about just picking these films that neither of us have seen, it could have been a car wreck. We could have come in and gone, do you know what? This is an absolute travesty. It's a real sort of vanity piece and all this other stuff. Because I'm sure it could have been. Sure. But even then, it's a film I haven't seen. We'd have learned something from it. And luckily, this turned out and we both enjoyed it, so that's good. But moving on, because this is it now. We're sort of, we're going to be going at warp speed now into the next couple of films. There you go. How's that for a transition? And the next film we're going to be doing is probably just as slow, and thinks it's probably as smart. May not be. We're going to see if it holds up. We are going to be talking about Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which is 1979, I think. 1980.
I think it's 80. 80, yeah.
Yeah, so we're jumping ahead a couple of years. We're still on it. It's got a huge 70s influence.
Oh yeah.
But we'll be talking about so not the man who fell to Earth, but the men who warped into space. So we'll see what we think of that on the next
79.
79. Yeah. There you go. So that's still in the 70s. And I haven't watched this probably a couple of years. I have seen it relatively recently, but I'm still looking forward to going back to that one and seeing how we both, you and I, come to that one.
I'm looking forward to it. So, don't forget, we're on Twitter at PodTimeSpace. And if you want to hear us two bald geniuses talking about the Twilight Zone, you get episodes regularly if you subscribe to the 20th Century Geek Patreon.
That's right. Yeah, short bursts as well. It's us going right. 15, 20 minutes. We discuss an episode in and out. Some really good thoughts, some really good discussion, and it's going to be every episode. We're really sort of pushing through that, and that's been a fantastic set of discussions as well. And for me, as the Brit, I'm coming into it relatively new for a lot of the episodes. And Julian, it's a series I think you're much more familiar with. So it's a different experience, which is great.
And if you pledge $100, you get to see me dressed up as Ziggy Stardust.
Yeah. Hell, for 150, we'll both do it. I may even have that in the cupboard somewhere. But yes, he's right. But we have got these different things on. Come find us on Part-Time Space. Come tell us what you thought of this film. Did you think it was a masterpiece? Did you enjoy it, or did you think this was a turgid 2.5 hour waste of time? Because if you did, that's fine. Come and tell us. I'd be fascinated to think why you thought that. Come and let us know. And you're right. If you want to support the podcast, there are many ways to do it. First and foremost is put a review. 5 stars, 4 stars, whatever you want to do. Go put a review on your podcast catcher. It really helps sort of spread the word. Or even that, just go on to your social media platform and tell people about us. Tell them to come check us out. We're open to discussion. We want to talk to people. Come and contact us. And yeah, we have a Patreon. It's 20th Century Geek Media. So it's patreon.com/20CG Media, MEDIA. And you'll find out they've got 3 tiers, and they've got a whole bunch of stuff on there. Different extra podcasts, us talking about the Twilight Zone, new creators, all kinds of bits and pieces. Go check it out. It's all good stuff, and it supports this podcast and the sister podcast, 20th Century Geek. But yeah, so we are carrying on. We're going to be going into Star Trek. We basically in the first series we really tore apart into Star Wars in the best possible way. Now let's see how Star Trek stands up, and we'll do the same. And then we're going to go off into the 80s, and we've got all kinds of things coming up. So we've got a great season ahead of us.
Buckaroo Banzai.
Which I recently read the novelization of, and I've got the comic to read as well before we get to it. So
yes.
I'm a lot more informed about that show than I probably should be. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you'll come talk to us, and we shall talk to you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.